Hi everybody, welcome to our home. Gonna make a little bit of red wine. Today we're using the Chateau Merlot box. We'll do a fancy cut for that. The general idea here is that anybody can make red wine, so I'm going to show the basic steps and the things that you need to do so. First off, you're going to need a wine kit. Second, you're going to need a bucket. In this case, I have a big 5-gallon, well, actually in this case 6-gallon pail with a spigot drilled into it. Any wine supply store will probably be able to just give you the bucket, and if you ask them nicely, they will pre-drill this for you and maybe even attach it. It's quite nice because during the making of this wine, you're going to have to move it from one container to another to reduce the bitterness that you get in the wine. Cheap wine, or that wine that you got from that one guy that one time that really sucked, didn't get moved from one bucket to another. So, first off, we're going to need to sanitize. Before you even get into the juices, you should make sure that all of your stuff is very clean. A dirty bucket means dirty wine. Dirty wine tastes like garbage. So, Star San, at least where we are, Star San's the easiest stuff to get. 5-star chemicals, blah blah blah. The active ingredient, phosphoric acid. So it's basically just a pretty straightforward acid cleanser. If you're a chemist, maybe you could use a different one. Generally, go to your wine supply store, get a sanitizer. You don't need one quite this big. I make a lot of wine. The standard procedure is to fill the bucket with wine or water, then add 1 ounce of this stuff, give it a good swish, let it sit for a while, and then also wash all of your other equipment. So we have things like mixing spoons that just generally help you to do the stirring that you're going to need to do to actually get the proper gravity in your wine, which we'll cover in a little bit. So you're going to want to sanitize this stuff as long as you haven't had it sanitized before you started. We're also going to grab the hydrometer. So the hydrometer is the piece that is actually most important for making wine, or actually any alcoholic beverage. It's going to have an indicator on it, so I can actually come forward and show that to you a little bit. I don't know how well this is in focus, but the general idea is it's going to have these numbers and percentages on it, and it's going to tell you the potential alcohol content of the fluid that you're using to make your alcohol, whether that be apple juice or, in this case, grape juice. So we're going to need to sanitize, do our mixing. We'll return for the mixing.
1 minute, 37 seconds later.
For the record, when you use Star San sanitizer, you are not supposed to rinse off all of the stuff. You can leave the bubbles. It's perfectly fine. I'm rinsing it because I've made it a little strong to use a wipe. So let's get right into it. First things first, gonna open up the box. So they're glued, and I didn't prep this. You are going to receive corks for when this is all over, more corks for when the second one is all over, your stickers, ta-da! All of the ingredients that are actually important for the making of this wine. You may not actually use all of these depending on whether or not you are a professional winemaker. Some people don't like to use the fining agents because they drink the wine too quickly. That's perfectly fine. So let's set that there. So that's actually going to be the full kit for this making, with the exception of wood chips. Some people use the wood chips, some people do not. This gives it that oaky flavor that a standard wine might have. So because we're not making this in a barrel, we just throw wood into our bucket. Little covery bits for the top of your wine bottles. Small note, you can add the bentonite clay at this stage. Basically, you're going to mix it into a small pail, 250 milliliters of water, I think it says, and then put it into the bucket before you do the juice. You can also do this at the second step, which is what I'm going to do. I haven't tried it yet. I want to see how it goes. So you can ignore this if you want to stick with the video. Here comes the fun bit. This bag is fairly heavy. be mindful of that when you go to remove it from the box. If you are not a person who lifts weights regularly, put it in a position where it's safe for you to lift. Okay, it's like a giant gooey baby. So this is actually concentrated grape juice. You're going to need to dilute this grape juice with water. You want to get it up to about, I don't know, 70, I get it up to about body temperature, which is probably a touch warm, but the wine keeps coming out the way that I like it, not necessarily the way that they intended for me to make it, so I'm happy. First things first, this cap. If you've ever worked at something like a movie theater or a Subway or various other places, it's the same thing, just a plastic cap that can be taken off with a bottle opener, or if you're a heathen like me, teeth. Woo! Don't spill it all over the floor. It stains everything. Okay, first step. Juice. Fancy bucket of juice. Beautiful. So be aware that it is not actually supposed to fill this bucket. Like I said, we're going to dilute this with water. Very important to properly clean out this bag. So you're not actually going to get all the wine that you expect to get unless you clean out this bag appropriately. Now, I just installed this sink, but not all of it. The water's not here. So I've got this little hose that comes through from the opposite side of the wall here. Excuse me while I... Just going to fill this up with some warm water. So right now I'm going to raise the temperature of the juice that's in there to slightly above what I actually want the final temperature to be. So I'm actually kind of putting mildly hot water into this bag to give it a rinse. The general idea being that I can then add cold water to the bucket without having to try and fiddle with the faucet here to get it to the appropriate temperature that I want it to be when I'm filling it. I can just kind of use whatever expertise that I think I have. So now, the actual kit supplies you with a set of measurements that you can use. I don't. There's no real reason to use those measurements because the thing that you're actually aiming for is the gravity that we were talking about earlier. So that specific potential alcohol content is the gravity. Achieving the specific gravity that you want, haha, it's called a specific gravity. Achieving that gravity that you want is the process that you're actually doing right now. So adding some warm water. I think the guide says 3 liters, so I'll just pretend that that's what this is. It's okay if you miss just a touch in the corners of the bag. It's not really going to hurt anything. You'll just get a tenth of a glass of wine less wine. Okay, so dispose of your plastics accordingly. Stirry thing. Now I just sanitized this. It's still a little bit wet. It's got the foam on it, like I said earlier. The foam is perfectly acceptable. So I'm just going to give this a quick stir. Now, I actually have a level on here that specifies where the last batch of wine is. Well, it was. Not because I've made a mark on it, but because wine naturally stains things, and it stained the edge of my bucket. So I know exactly what level I need to fill this to for it to be the appropriate gravity, or at least within a small measurement. So what I'm actually going to do now is just fill this to slightly below that line so that I can test the gravity. So maybe we can do a time lapse or something like that of that. So now that the filling is done, we can now give it a quick stir just to make sure. Now, if you were watching the time lapse nicely, you would have seen that it was actually kind of doing a little bit of a mix while I was filling it, which is kind of what I was hoping for. So we should have a pretty good mixture already, but it is super, super important to actually mix this properly. So if you feel like you haven't done a decent job mixing, then continue mixing. And after you've gotten to a respectable level of mixing, mix a little more. Just because you 100% do not want to make mistakes in your general, or your, sorry, not general, specific gravity. The specific gravity will come out a little weird, and then you won't get the right alcohol content, which is mildly disappointing, actually. You know, it's not that big of a deal, but still. I don't like having less alcohol than I promised myself I would have. It's a good color. Should be slightly darker than what your expected red wine will look like. Okay. So, now that we are there, I forgot something. I have to show you. Woo! This is a wine thief. So now, the purpose of this, as the name suggests, is to steal a wine from the currently fermenting bucket. This has actually been sanitized ahead of time, so I don't really need to re-sanitize it, but I do have a mildly sanitized cloth here, which I can use to just give it a little bit of a wipe on the outside, because any particulate which is gathered on the outside is going to be less than optimal. Keep in mind that when you set this cloth down, whatever you set it down on will be partially sanitized and also introduce dirt to this. So, this, I'm going to give it just a second, because Star San, not sponsored, takes 3 minutes to do its job. But we don't need quite that much time considering it's already been sanitized. So, I have this bucket. I'm going to steal some wine from this bucket and add it into my hydrometer setup. So the hydrometer setup only needs to go full enough to lift this little glass tube on the inside. So I'm going to do that now. This is actually the standard procedure unless you have some sort of awkward hand pump. Just suck on the hose, the wine will come up into the tube. The better you are at sucking, the easier this is to do. Keep in mind this may be slightly messy. Going to transfer some wine now, so try not to get too many bubbles because it's going to disturb the reading that you're going to take on the actual hydrometer. So notice we're only there it goes. Lift it up. So just a touch more so that we don't have to worry about bouncing on the bottom. I'm going to go like this. Put the rest back into the bucket. We'll let that rest within the bucket until we need it again. So, well, until we need it out of there. If you're paying very close attention, you can see that I'm spinning this. So now this is actually more important for something like a beer. So if you're making a beer, keep this in mind. If any bubbles are on the hydrometer, they will disturb the reading that you're going to get. Now, we get a reading of 1.1. I need a reading of, just a moment while I pull out the instructions. Okay, so, instructions. The Chateau 4-week 7-liter wine kit, giant list of instructions, states that the specific gravity using your hydrometer and wine thief should be 1.080 to 1.095. So, or higher. So technically speaking, we are within the range because 1.1 is higher than 1.095. But I'm actually going to bring it down just a touch. Like I said, I'm slightly below the line that I used last time. I actually do want to be closer to the 1.095. So, much like before, we don't need a time lapse for this one. It's very quick to touch up the level. Just going to add a little bit of water, and then we're going to do a little bit of mixing. Oh, side note, you can read the temperature of your fluid from the hydrometer. Not the glass tube itself, but the feel of this tube should give you a general idea. If it's cold, it's too cold. If it's warm, it's too warm. You should just pretty much feel like any other object in the room that's not metal, because metal is always cold. Okay, so we now need to mix again. Also, what you put in here before needs to be returned, because if you just leave it in here, you're going to get the same measurement. You need new stuff. So back in that goes, just gently like that. We don't need to clean it. We're going to fill it again. I'm going to give it a quick stir. And by quick, I mean thorough. Now, you could just drink it at this point. It is Welch's at this point, but I'm not going to do that. I like wine. So, one more time. The better you suck, the better this goes. I suck, but apparently not that much. Okay. Right to about the same spot. It's not actually necessary to get it in the same location, just need to get the hydrometer to float. One more time, let's have a look. Spin, get all the bubbles off of it. Have another look. One. So notice that these readings, let's see if I can get some of the bubbles off of there. These readings are actually 1, 9, 8, as this actually drops down in. So it should be lower. You should not be able to see the 1.1 anymore. In this case, I see the 9. So that tells me I'm above 1.9 by 2 ticks. If I look on here, that would put me at 1.92. So we are now at the appropriate specific gravity. We move on to the next step. I'll just read it. Next step. If oak is included in your kit, add it. Now, as I mentioned before, the oak, this little baggie here, is not actually necessary. Like it says, some kits don't even include it. But I kind of like an oaked wine. I find that everybody's been enjoying my oaked wine, so I'm going to continue adding the oak to my wine. If you come over here and look.
What does it look like?
It looks like wood. Oh, who would have guessed? Oaky. Alright, so, okie dokie. Oh, that's terrible. So, some of this is going to be a little bit of wood dust. That's okay. You should be able to get rid of that in the cycling process. So, I'm going to remove this before it's entirely coated in wood chips. Well, isn't that fancy? So, we'll just add this back in. Give it a quick dribble in there. I'm going to then clean this after this process is finished. I probably don't need to show you that part because sanitizing is pretty much as it is. So, the instructions basically tell you, oak it up, get it in there, stir it properly, don't just leave it on top. You kind of want to get it soaking. Okay, so that's good and in there now. Just mostly, like, it's always going to float. It's wood. But better to have it soaked so that it can sink. And then it's not just all sitting on top of the foam. So, I am now going to set this off to the side. Switch over to my kit, which contains all the stuff. I'm going to find the one that's not the wine killer. It is in fact this little packet right here. So now each wine kit might have something slightly different. In this case it is an EC1118 yeast. So every yeast is a little bit different. Some of them make a stronger wine, some of them make a lighter wine. This one's just the one that they supply. So going to get all the yeast to the bottom, open the package. Shouldn't be particularly difficult unless you have some sort of strange child-proof wine packet, which I guess kind of would make sense. Apparently I've got a little bit more foam than I normally do. Doesn't matter though, we're okay. Just make sure to sprinkle this good and even. You don't necessarily want to get a giant pile of this stuff, otherwise it won't really soak up all of your wine juices here. You're not actually meant to really stir this at this point, but if you find that none of this actually makes it into the wine, you could give it a really gentle mix along the top, but usually you don't want to mess with it because it actually does need the oxygen that is supplied at the top of the kit. Sorry. Lid. Lid is as important as the bucket. This has also been sanitized. What will happen here is this foam is actually not going to stay gone away. It'll go away for a bit as this is catching, and then it's going to rise up again. Hence the mark along the edge of the bucket there. That's a result of concentrated yeast gunk as a part of the foam. You're going to want to seal this on very good. So in this case, this bucket has a nice rubber seal. If your bucket doesn't have a nice rubber seal, you could probably just put a little bit of something that won't evaporate on the edges. I wouldn't recommend a grease gun, not exactly healthy. Okay, good seal is important. Fruit flies and things like that love the smell of wine fermenting. You do not want to get fruit flies in your wine. You also do not want to get flies in your wine. Anything that can lay an egg in your wine. So, you want an airlock. Now, you don't necessarily have to, but it's recommended that you add some, I believe it's called potassium sorbate, to the airlock so that it blocks any scents that are coming out of the wine. I personally actually like to be able to smell it, but it does attract fruit flies, as I said. So what you're going to do now is your bucket should have a lid with a hole drilled in it. In this actual step, you don't need a lid with a hole. You just need something that's going to let the air out. You can do a loosely fitting lid, or like a non-sealed lid. I know I said put something in there, but that's mostly just to keep out whatever can crawl in. You actually do want air to be able to escape. The airlock is the best way to do it because nothing else can get back in. So we'll just place this on here. Make sure that it has a good seal. I can say that it has a good seal because when I press down on the lid, we get the fluid movement. So that's actually what's going to happen. The wine is going to ferment, carbon dioxide is going to build up, and the carbon dioxide is going to push out that wonderful fermenting wine smell, bloop, 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 and then it will return somewhat to the state that it's in currently. So, right now, that is how to set up your wine for the primary ferment. We will return in 10 days to show you the next step. Thank you for watching.
Bye!